The world knows about the backlog bonanza. All right, let's see. I'll make a paper document.
Well, honestly, why don't we just take notes directly into a Zulip stream, and then for the most part, we will be taking notes in the RFCs themselves.
Okay, that's fine. I'm still making a paper document, but that's a good idea. The reason is, I'll put out the link. I wanted to try to also emerge with a let me share this. I wanted to emerge with a sort of sketch. I figured we might emerge with some sketches of like what are the stages we see things at and what are some of the notable candidates in there. And that like other dimension of organization could go into the doc and is not something that isn't amenable to random streaming of comments.
That makes sense.
Okay, I'll send this link. Side note that I would at some. Should we start with RFCs or with tracking issues?
So RFCs seem like they are the more critical backlog. Tracking issues. So there's a different kind of disposition, I would say. RFCs are more about, do we still care about this? Do we want to support working on it? Should it be a project group, etc.? Tracking issues, half of them are going to be things that have been implemented and we need to talk about, are they stable yet? What's their status? All that kind of thing. I imagine that we could get through 10 tracking issues or 30 RFCs.
Okay, I think I agree with that. So in a way, I find tracking issues more interesting in the sense that they show off more parts, states of project. However, I agree with you that RFCs are more urgent in some sense because people have been waiting somehow. Let's start with those. And it's probably always good to start with the beginning anyway. Let me just make my, what are the labels anyway? It's like searches, let's say, tracking issue. And I thought it was a good starting place to include this random label.
So those would be the ones that are not yet implemented. We should also look at the ones that are implemented.
I think this is both.
Oh, do you think we leave the RFC approved tag? Because the description of the tag said, but not yet implemented.
Okay, well, I don't know.
I wouldn't trust the tags on tracking issues much. I don't think we've really kept them in a very good state, especially from.
Well, we could start with the tagged ones and then go through all the untagged ones after, I suppose.
Right. That was what I was just going to suggest. Anyway, we're not going to get that far today, so we'll go back later. This is sort of other tracking issues, I guess. All right, so RFCs. Oldest first?
Oldest first. So.
Extension.
Wait. Sorry, I'm slightly confused. Oh, I was on issues, not pull requests. Yeah, issues is a whole different day of triage, isn't it?
Yes. So target extension. What even is this? It's pretty old. Anyone know what this is even about? Extend Rusty's target extension to follow the LLVM triples. We don't include the OS and environmental version. This sort of feels like playing. It's one of those like, I don't even know what the right team is for this.
was just trying to pull that up. I finally got the search back.
So the summary is like extend rusty target triples to have more information such as OS version, etc. I think I would safely call this like interest low, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think one thing I would wonder is a problem of like, are they actually solving? The problem is we want to process things in a way that depends on the underlying version of the OS, but
that's right. This has to do with BSD being backwards incompatible from time to time.
right. Well, I think from time to time is every time that they move forward versions, they make no guarantees whatsoever. BSD, unlike Linux, has no stable kernel API. They're more like the old Solaris and similar, where they say libc is the API.
Yeah, okay. Targeting BSD, which makes API changes regularly. So I guess I would call this like, if there was somebody who really was motivated, I'm not like opposed to it, but it's not something
Right.
where it doesn't really fit any of our objectives, and it's not something we would encourage per se.
One thing I'm wondering is, does it make sense to actually extend the LLVM triple, or does it make sense to keep the triple the same, but...
Oh, too detailed.
Okay.
I don't know.
I think it's a problem worth solving. Somebody motivated needs to be in a project group to solve it.
I would also maybe suggest that we have some sort of like, this doesn't really need to be an RFC. Like we would maybe start with not an RFC, or at least I would suggest that something like this would better be sort of an unstable feature that's just added to the compiler because it's so low impact. And then if like it seems useful and we gain experimentation, then it actually, we formally specify it and then go from there.
Yeah, maybe. That's interesting. That does fit the, I guess this is also an opportunity for us, that was part of the goal here, to talk about like what process we would want. And I think this fits pretty well the like MCP process in some sense, because one of the motivations was like, they should be able to just say a couple of paragraphs, which we already like no more than we just said in this 5 minutes. And we should be able to say, yeah, the right process for that is like, we'll make a group, but that's more like, let's implementation tinker and stabilize after. Yeah. That's a really interesting point. Okay. Paper, come on. Yeah, this does feel like more like T compiler, honestly, than T lang even, but
quite possibly, but
it's in that gray area. But
I could see why T compiler would be relevant, especially if somebody wanted to add a new like target OS version thing. Anyway,
I don't know. It is lang, but it's like target triples. Okay.
Sure.
Debuggable macro expansions. So I forget what this does, but I remember thinking about it. I think it allows people to annotate their macros somewhat to help control the
It looks like it adds dwarf unwinding information and like backtraces to macros basically, which seems sort of out of scope for any of our known goals at this point.
It's useful to have interesting debug information for macros, but I'm not sure if this is the way to do it.
Okay. It adds dwarf information?
Well, it would add to, like, we emit debug info for macros with this RFC, whereas today we sort of just treat them as, want to say, we only, like, the final expansion is treated as like its own file or something like that.
So, okay. You're saying, like, if I hit backtrace, I would see the macro expansion part in
Yeah.
GDB?
That's my understanding.
I mean, this is another one of, like, I think it's kind of never going to fit any of our priorities unless one of them is explicitly, like, improve Rust debugger story, but it also feels like a place where it would probably be more of a let's tinker on the compiler side and get it working, and I don't know, then we need to have an RFC upfront situation.
I think it's another case where it would be very, like, I would expect that we would basically accept a PR for this if someone implemented it in Rust.
Yes, that's kind of where I'm at. This really
there was a ton of new noise from Yuri and Mark.
I just disabled my video because I was having a lot of issues. I don't know, hopefully, maybe it'll be better. I'm not sure if that was related to any noise, but. So, all right. So this seems like there's some status, I don't know quite how to describe it, but it's like implementation first or something. It's not really if someone were, it's kind of like, not a clear fit for, or yeah, in terms of, it kind of would probably start by approving a group to experiment on compiler, not a high priority item, sort of a nice to have, and generally speaking. But if someone were motivated to see it through, would be good. I think that.
Should we be triaging these things as we go so that we don't see them again, or should we be waiting to the end and then people have a pile of work to do to go through and put summaries of these in?
Yeah, I don't know. I noticed I'm not doing it. I'm sort of inclined to do it. I feel like I'm not quite ready to start committing to these interpretations yet until I've seen a little.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
So over-constraining and under-specifying unsafe. So I think this lets you do this lets you write an impl that is, if the trait method is unsafe, your impl doesn't have to stay unsafe. Right?
So I think there's an interesting interaction. We just mechanism for the body of unsafe functions to no longer be unsafe. And you still have to write unsafe fun because you're implementing an but the actual body of the function will not be assumed to be unsafe.
Yeah. By the way, is that you're like something is clipping in and out with your audio, at least on my side. But yeah, I was going to mention that interaction. I remember somebody talking about that as a motivation for making the body of unsafe functions not unsafe. And I have to say, I think this RFC does it better. Like, if your intent is to show you're not using unsafe code, it's even clearer if you don't make the function declared as unsafe.
So I think there's an interesting thing here, though, which is if you have an unsafe trait method where the method was marked as unsafe, your intent may be to say that whether the body of this method is unsafe or not, a call to this method expects the method to maintain certain assumptions, and if you don't maintain those assumptions, something unsafe might happen. And that would be my interpretation of an unsafe trait, which means I think the most accurate way to describe it is this is an unsafe fun whose body happens to be safe, but it's still an unsafe fun because there may be expectations you must be needing to meet, and you shouldn't just be able to omit the word unsafe but still implement something that might cause you be elsewhere.
So that, I think you're talking about this last bullet, which is to say, right now there's some kind of ambiguity about, in some sense, so you could imagine there being an ambiguity where you might say, this function is actually unsafe to implement because you have to make sure that you meet some post condition.
Right.
And this RFC kind of clarifies that no, it does not mean that. It can only mean this function is unsafe to call.
Right. I think what I'm suggesting is I don't think I agree with that interpretation.
I've gone back and forth on this, but so in some sense, I think this actually fits our priorities, but in the loosest sense, like we have this unsafe code guidelines effort, which I think is a kind of priority of like nailing down our semantics and figuring stuff out that we've been putting off too long. It's a vague priority, but it's a priority. And I think it fits into that bucket. Whether or not we want to do it, we can discuss separately, but I would fit it in that heading of unsafe code guidelines effort. Does that sound accurate in some sense?
I mean, I just don't want to treat guidelines as a dumping ground for that just means we don't have to solve the problem.
Well,
I mean, specifically.
I agree with that. I mean, I think we have to solve the problem of making the unsafe code guideline, of restarting that as a group and having
Sure.
it productive. But right. I don't know. One question would be whether, I remember that we had some methods like, this one, trusted iterator length, and we discussed this back and forth.
Right. I get the argument that maybe if you are calling the trait because you expect certain things from it, maybe you want to have unsafe trait rather than just unsafe fun, but I think in practice people don't necessarily do that.
So I'm going to just, okay. I think the reason I brought up the unsafe code guidelines effort is that I think if we were going to move this into more project group territory, like thinking about what the procedure would be to move this forward, I think that's the way I would have preferred it to be, is that we have some people who are working around unsafe and they decide like one of the priorities they want to make is stuff like unsafe function and using the unsafe keyword in the unsafe function body. It fits in with that. It's kind of a, let's define what unsafe means in Rust. And one of those bits of that, maybe in some sense the simplest bit, is to define whether it's saying, who is it putting proof obligations on?
Would there be any objection if I were to nominate this for a brief discussion in the next Lang meeting, just to say, is this a question we agree with?
You can nominate it. I don't object to that. Don't know whether we'll have a productive, I'd want to read the thread and look a little back through it too. I think what I agree with is that, yeah, okay. Feel free to nominate. I don't want to go into too. I guess
Okay.
all I would say is that I think I agree with, I wish that we could have a very clear, that it could mean only one thing, but I don't know whether there's stuff that would make that not work out very well. So, eager macro expansion. What's another, another dimension we could, I don't know. I can decide exactly what the output of this process is. I feel like another thing I would like to know is kind of how big is this proposal? Like, is this some small standalone thing, or is it, there's probably, there are small ideas that are linked to big questions, like this unsafe keyword. And there are ideas that are just big, like I do eager macro is kind of a big proposal. In some sense, it's a targeted change, but it feels like one with weighty consequences to me. Now, well, let's keep going. So I think this would, if we were going to go forward with eager macro expansion, I think it would need a strong, I don't know, this is tied in with that problem of nobody really understands our hygiene all that well. But it's not, I guess I would say, like, I wouldn't want to go forward with this. Certainly not without Petroshenkov, and really probably not without somebody having, like, somebody else besides Petroshenkov. So we have multiple people who understand that hygiene, and especially someone who can, like, bring it to the Lang team meeting and communicate it well to us, because the rest of us, in other words, not till we paid down our name resolution debt.
Right. I do have one interesting observation from poking at the compiler implementation of inline ASM here, which is because we don't have eager macro expansion, macros that need to deal with things like I need a string constant, but I could potentially accept a concat of string constants, have to manually say, I want to evaluate my first argument and then see if my first argument ended up being a string literal after expansion. That's a great deal of work pushed around to other macros, and the idea of concat being eager seems like a better way to handle that. Or alternatively, maybe it would be nice if you could just declare a macro argument as please expand me before evaluating the rest of this macro.
Right, so that makes sense. I wouldn't say it's not well motivated, like there's motivation. I think that maybe another piece of outcome from this process is helping us identify the gaps where we could try to find recruiting, like if we were thinking about growing the team or something, try to recruit for that area. I don't know. I feel okay going forward with this if somebody had more background, someone was like, yes, you should do this. I just know that every time I talk to anyone who deals with macros from outside of Rust, they're always like, no, don't do that. Visit wherever I'm actually doing here. Derive, no bound, derive field bound. I assume this is saying that you want to, right, be able to like derive clone without, yeah, this example, basically. Being able to derive clone without forcing that being bound on every parameter.
As in, your type is such that you don't need clone on the field in order to have clone on your type?
Yeah. That's the example is usually like they used arc for this reason. Right? Arc of t is clone no matter what t is. So you don't need t to be clone. And there's some like backwards compatibility. There's no backwards compatibility issues with this proposal, but the main alternative is figure it out automatically, and that is challenging, but also like not actually possible right now, but also arguably backwards. There's a backwards incompatibility sort of addition related question in my view, because if you have, it's a pretty much of a long shot, but you can imagine that you have a struct where, yeah, it doesn't, strictly speaking, it doesn't need t to be cloned, but for some reason you want it to have that meaning. I think it's more likely with like, I don't know. I can't think.
Is this so common to want to do this that it's better than actually writing impl clone?
Yeah, in my view, I think it comes up for me semi-regularly. It's pretty annoying when it does. It's probably partly annoying because of the lack of implied bounds. But like, because often I have some type with a lot of where clauses and things, and writing the impl is kind of just annoying.
I certainly would like to see implied bounds.
I think it's more of a problem, like derived clone in some sense is the easy case, because most of the time when you're writing it yourself, the compiler will catch you if you forget a field. If you're doing something like partial eq, then it's really easy to add a field and then forget to add it to partial eq if you implement it yourself.
Yeah.
And we have no support for really catching that today.
I always write partial eq in a specific way to avoid that, but that most people probably don't do that because they're not masochists. But also, like, it's annoying. It's just boilerplate annoying. Like even clone is just annoying code to write a lot of the time.
So another question would be, is this something that's common enough that it should be in the standard derive of clone or partial eq, or would this be done well with a macro of some kind that could live in the Crates.io ecosystem?
There already are macros, but it's common enough in my opinion.
I think the argument is more so that, like today, if you, for example, if you have like Surrey and then partial eq and all of the others, then pretty much every macro that is in Crates.io is going to have its own version of this. Whereas if we have these standardized, then everybody can just go off of these.
There's a crate called Better Derive or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think. Okay.
It's called some name like that. It's not that. But...
Okay.
I don't know. It's an ergonomic win. I think it's again one of those, like, I don't know what priority it ties to exactly, except for it would be nice to do ergonomic things.
I'm having a little trouble with the idea of, it seems like it's a lot of surface area for what it's providing, but then it also sounds like I'm not in the case where I run into this a lot, so I may not be the best person to judge that.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's, I think like a lot of ergonomic issues, perhaps, or it's one of those niche ergonomic issues where when it annoys you a lot, but a lot of times it's just not effective. Those are always a little hard to touch. I tend to feel like they're actually worth doing, but not always. Depends how much they infect, how self-contained they are.
Sure.
This feels like if you didn't know about it, you don't have to know about it. Like you don't learn about it until you hit the problem and you ask on users forum, how do I deal with this? And someone says, oh, just put this on your type. And you're like, okay. But anyway. So I think this, yeah, okay. So this proposal, after this one, I want us to come back and decide get a little more like actual outcomes out of these 5. But this proposal, not sure if you all remember it, what it's aiming to do is solve the question of, I want to write foo.bar, but I guess a specific example. Today we have channel.send of a value. Send is a inherent method that's top priority. It might be nice to extract a trait channel methods that has send so that other things can implement it. But now it's not an inherent method. That could be ambiguities. You have to import the trait. So what people often do is add like both delegates to the other.
Sorry.
That's annoying and boilerplatey. And this just came up in talk the other day. I don't know. I feel like this actually comes up to me a fair amount in some way or another, but not right away, not for a while. The other thing, relevant? Maybe it's not. I was going to say it might be relevant also to this question of, or it reminded me of the question of like, being able to move methods from itertools to the standard library, but I guess it's not, I don't know that this proposal actually helps with that problem in any particular way. I think that it does definitely overlap with the delegate proposals, which are basically a way of saying we'll not add a new concept like an inherent trait, but we will add a way to make the boilerplate less annoying of forwarding methods.
So the premise of this is that if you have the type in scope, then you don't necessarily have the entire trait in scope, but you have the fact that this particular type implements the trait in scope?
Yes, I guess so. I'm not sure what, like that's not a standard, the fact that a type implements a trait is not a standard thing.
So you can call .send without importing channel methods, and you could pass the channel to something that asks for an impl of channel methods.
Right.
Even though you don't have the name channel methods in scope?
Yes, but the latter is always possible, passing to a method, but
good point.
Just the dot notation.
In that case, this sounds excellent.
Another way to do it, or the one way I've thought about it before, but is not in this RFC, but as a notation, would be like if you imagine you had this, being able to write something like that. I'm not saying you actually should use that notation. Maybe the thing in the RFC is better, but the only reason I mention it is just to give across the idea that it's like saying this trait is really integral to foo, and it has to be done at the same time that foo. But
So the first thing that comes to mind here is this sounds great. I'd love to have it. And I wonder if it's another one of those things where name resolution folks would be deeply concerned about it.
no, it doesn't affect name resolution. It affects the compiler's method dispatch logic. But I don't think it would be especially complicating in terms of the implementation. It'd be a bit of a pain, but not too bad.
Then in that case, my first reaction is yes, please. I mean, syntax aside, which I agree the syntax you're proposing might be better than something involving an attribute, but...
Maybe, I'm not sure. Yeah. My main hesitation would be whether the delegate solution is actually better.
So I'm curious, if you did the delegate solution, wouldn't that imply that there are two implementations of the method, one just calling the other?
Yep.
That seems, from a code generation point of view, less optimal than just having one implementation.
Yeah. There might be some way to optimize, I don't know, but all right. So okay, so I think we can agree that like general sentiment positive, that we'd like to solve this problem. I want to circle back to the question of what is the expected outcome of this? We're 40 minutes in. I think this has been useful. But what I don't want to have happen is that we spend hours and hours going over this and then we're just sort of done. So we have to have some, like, what are the resolutions that we're trying to slot each of these RFCs into? And maybe we can discuss what those are a bit for a second.
I mean, are we planning to actually close or FCP or otherwise disposition some of these RFCs today, or are we just wanting to make comments on them?
That's kind of what I'm asking, partially. I don't know if I want to act today, but I think I would like to reach the point where we've made decisions that are like close or have a route to have a recommended next step for the person to take, which might be nothing.
Sure. So recommended next steps do seem like a good idea, but also if we have an inclination that the right next step is either that we should accept something or that we should reject something, then I think that that's what FCP is for. We should go ahead and invoke it and then see what other language team members think.
So, okay, what are the possible next steps? There's close. Doesn't fit our priorities. There's probably like, is a move to MCP one of the possibilities, or like try to find a project group or something?
Yes.
I have this fear that we're going to suggest people that they file a bunch of MCPs and then close the MCPs because there's like no people to liaison with them. But so that's partly why I don't necessarily want to take action at the moment, because some of the ones we think we might want to, I might like to go to. You don't have that many potential liaisons at this time. Maybe we can pre-discuss and decide we think this like might be good, but there are, you can file an MCP, but you're not going to get anybody. I don't know, or we're interested, we're putting it on this delayed column, something like that. When would we suggest that we merge it?
I think if we both completely agree with the problem and we think that the solution seems like the obvious one and we don't think that there's value in kicking somebody back to an MCP and saying, consider other possibilities.
Okay, so that's maybe the thing I'm really looking for. Yeah, so I think it's probably why. We think the solution seems like the obvious one. Probably we have a liaison in mind to see it go through, or we feel comfortable just tracking it that way. Maybe it doesn't need a link team liaison if, like, you feel like the link team design part. It needs a link team liaison, but they don't have much to do. The design part is done, so it's really just implementation. We should okay. So what do we do if all of these things are, to what extent do we want to try to pre-figure out how much we have? Like, should we just assume an infinite pool of liaisons and then issue a warning that, by the way, we're not sure which of these things, this is the first round of, and like based on when MCPs come and what happens, they may or may not get, you might get deferred on that basis.
I think if we end up with 20 MCPs and the fact that we need some more liaisons, that would be a good argument for us to continue doing what we're doing of let's cultivate some more potential liaisons, since we're already talking to people about that.
Or just put on the short list. Yeah, okay. I can buy that.
I'm also hoping that I would like us to be in a state where we have a backlog of MR tagged as we have a couple of potential liaisons and they don't have time yet. I think having our visible time queues out there is important.
We'll open the tracking issue and move to the, open tracking issue and add to our being implemented. We don't actually have this, but I'm probably going to do it.
Right. Effectively jump ahead to the same state we'd be in if we accepted an MCP and then accepted an RFC from there.
Right, and I think I want to update our project board structure a little bit so that it has, like right now, it has, let me see, what does it have? It just kind of has a notion of active project groups.
Right.
But I think that's not good enough. And
yeah, I think we should have the concept of being implemented, being tested, being stabilized, etc.
And it probably wants, we may even want 2 project boards, like to separate out the proposals and stuff that's very early stage from the stuff we're actively doing and maybe shortlisted things. So that it's kind of like, if you want to follow along, you go to the one, you see what's happening now. Like if you want to get involved in hack or something, that's kind of a useful place for that. You go to the other and you see like the very early stage discussions that are going on. Okay.
So effectively something would graduate from one board to the other when it is accepted and it's no longer in the, we're thinking about it phase. It's in the somebody needs to do the work phase.
Yes. I'm not sure exactly.
Makes sense.
Maybe I guess I think the short list, the short list probably also belongs in the Okay, this seems like good. So let's go back over here. So target extension. This would be an MCP specifically, sounds like.
Yeah, I think file an MCP, we'd like to see a project group solve it, and we'd like them to consider whether, how it should be implemented, whether it should use target triples or some new, you know, other thing. I don't want to get into the weeds on details. I'm saying this is what we want the project group to evaluate.
So let's say, do you see this edit I just made? We agree with the problem and it is either small and self-contained or a reasonable fit for our priorities.
That makes sense. So if it's sufficiently small and self-contained, then it doesn't really need much help from us, and it's fine that it isn't exactly on our previous priority list, whereas if it's large, then we need to care about it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
My sense. We're willing to like at any time if somebody has some small syntax idea that seems nice and is popular, we can run with that. But if it's like a big change that's going to take effort and controversy to work through, that should fit a priority. What are our priorities? I feel like we've written them down a few times and I'm always like losing track of it. But I think they are, where was that HackMD? Language team ideas and priorities. Is that it? I don't know. Could be. Or is this some other random? I have so many with the same names. This looks like it. Okay. I'll just paste this in there for now. But I think it would be nice if we sort of have a short list. We kind of do a bit of a long list, but it's okay. Nonetheless, we're able to tie all these things to some priority in here, right? So target extension for 2408, I think that's probably small. I think that's just small. Maybe it ties into capabilities, but only barely. Right.
Sorry, you cut out there a little, Nico. What was that?
I said I wanted to be able to say for each thing that we say file in MCP, what priority it connects to. I think target extension 2048 does not really fit a priority. So the only argument in favor of it is that it's relatively small, and if someone else does most of the work, we're not opposed. Yeah, I think it kind of fits the low-level capabilities. Like,
yeah,
there might be some other. It may not be only BSD. Maybe there's some random platform. But okay, debuggable macro expansions. Still not really clear how much this is even a Lang team thing. Like debug info is.
Should we tell people to file a compiler team MCP?
I kind of think so.
Sounds reasonable.
We should, if we do say that, at least in this case, it should be very clear on our side that like the chances of somebody actually being able to pick this up and implement it are very low.
Yeah, no, part of the deal with the compiler team MCP is like you only file that if you want to do the work. So note that you should only do that if you plan to do the work. And even then, it's not clear that we'll have like a reviewer who wants to review it. But yeah, okay. I guess I think there's some precedent here that I wouldn't actually mind setting, which is that basically that the compiler team has some room to make small attributes and other things in the language, and we should be like, we can be brought into the process, but to approve it in the end of the day. and sort of and so forth, but like it doesn't require an RFC and so forth. I think there were some mentions of small changes, but okay. So overcommitting and undercommitting unsafe. I think the answer is, what is our suggestion here? It's probably like close or MCP. I should add this to a possible outcome. Another possible outcome is file a compiler team MCP.
I added that at the end.
Oh, you did. Okay, awesome. I'm torn between close and file MCP. But because it feels like it, I guess I would say close and discuss with Ralph and discuss with Safe Code Guidelines group. Like, I think there will be times that there's an existing group that's dealing with that stuff, and if somebody proposes something more like, why don't you bring it up in that group and see what they think about it. Now, in this case, I think the Unsafe Code Guideline group is in a weird state. Dormant. Not exactly dormant, just not actively developing RFCs per se, but still.
I would agree with close and discuss, yes.
Ideally would be part of Unsafe Code Guideline group if we get that running. Okay.
Should, when you say closed, should this be an RFC bot close?
Yes, except that I wish that RFC bot, I don't like that RFC bot close requires everyone to check their boxes. I think it should require at most one other box check and maybe none. And just be like, once you close, it goes straight into FCP. But still, we should do it. And we'll just worry about fixing RFC bot later.
Okay.
I don't like closing RFCs without giving people a chance to respond, because sometimes it's a stupid thing to do. But I also don't like adding a whole bunch more checkboxes just for work we don't want to do. So.
It's also worth noting close is a reversible thing.
It is, but there's something rude about it. It feels.
Not going to argue with that.
Okay, eager macro expansion.
So I had a suggestion in this context, which was let's poke a couple of people who are experts on name resolution and talk to them about whether this would be a net improvement in technical debt to do, or whether this would add to technical debt. If they say it's a net improvement, then we could consider accepting it. If they say it's a net increase in technical debt, let's at the very least postpone it.
So okay, maybe. I think that's fine. I feel like I kind of already know the answer, but I'm mostly wondering who to poke. But could at least
Petroshenkov?
Yeah, we can ask Petroshenkov and Felix.
And Felix, yeah, that sounds good.
I think, yeah, it's kind of on the border between MCP and close. Derive no bound and derive field bound. This is an interesting one, I want to say, in a different way. Are these last two? You know, we've been talking about documenting our priorities. And both of these two fit with me in some sense of like, it would be nice if we just had a list of known ergonomic hurdles and we could sort of say, we have a priority to solve this ergonomic problem or bundle of problems, or like some subset of this bundle of problems. And we're interested in solutions. And both of these fit in my mind. Like I would like, these are both well-known annoying things. It'd be nice if we listed them somewhere and we could say what we feel. That said, I think my suggestion is closed, but even though I want it, I don't know. My reason is, I don't know. It's it fits under targeted ergonomic wins. I'm just worried that it's like, it's not closing out something that we've been working on. It's like adding new things to our plate. But that's good for all these things. Maybe that's a problem. I know, Josh, you had some, you felt like the surface area per problem solved unit is not, ratio is not good.
It just seems like a lot of added complexity to derive. I'm not going to say that I feel very strongly about that, given that I'm also not the person who seems to be the target for this feature.
Yeah, I'm torn. I do agree, and that's why we don't have it yet. On the other hand, I feel like it's the kind of objection that's so frustrating when you have this problem. You're like, yeah, it's some more annotations, but it's a lot better than having to write a whole bunch more handles.
Right.
Maybe this is some kind of close call. Maybe that says we should, like, where do we lean? Maybe the answer is we should lean towards MCP so that we can then have a process, like have a discussion about.
Actually, let me ask you a question, Nico. If this were made in MCP, would you be a liaison for it since you specifically want the feature?
I would put it on a short list.
Okay, then that's a good enough argument for me. So MCP, Nico as possible liaison?
This is bringing back that idea of, we were discussing, like, does it really, it probably wants an MCP, but in some sense, RFC is already, well, I guess the reason is to put it in, that it might go on a short list. But, yeah, okay, it's fine. Inherent trait implementations.
So I see that there's already a suggestion filled in under there. I was actually going to say another possibility would just be RFC bot merge, because I think it's 90% there other than this bike shed of syntax, which is a valid bike shed, but otherwise.
Well, it does seem like an important one, but.
I've wanted this several times is mostly what I'm thinking.
So one of the concerns with this that I didn't see at a quick glance in the RFC is that it probably gets into questions about whether this trait, like, would it be inherent in the global crate, or is that, like, what is the coherence implication of inherent methods?
What do you mean by coherence implication?
Well, so normally if you have like an extension trait, the reason that anybody can define an extension trait, as I understand it, is that defining an extension trait doesn't actually like override anybody's sort of what they see and what they call. But if you, anybody can add sort of their own extension trait and call it, implement it for whatever type and call that an inherent impl, then like,
I mean, I was assuming
crate,
you could only do that from the crate to define the struct.
Right, which is actually a pretty good argument that for the syntax you're proposing, Nico, where you have to do it in the struct.
Yeah, that was partly what motivated that syntax.
Right. The other option would be to just lint against, not lint, but error against doing it outside of the module.
So I think what makes me a little hesitant to just merge is twofold. First of all, I think we should have an identified liaison. But secondly, it feels to me like the overlap, I guess like Mark's comment and also delegation feel like very related problems. And in my ideal world, there would be a group of people who are like looking to solve that cluster of problems. And maybe that's me trying to generalize too much. I'm open to that. But that would be my ideal, is that we have like a project group that says, first we're going to do this problem, then we're going to solve delegation. And then, we're going to have something like that. But maybe I'm trying to get people to do too much, and it's better to go step by step anyway. So if we identified a liaison, I wouldn't be opposed. I guess I also think it's weird to just merge this 2017 RC out of the blue. Like, somehow it feels like it should at least be closed and reopened.
I do think the argument that Mark just made, that there is a thing that needs considering, is important enough that we can't just FCP merge this. I do think it's worth going ahead and saying, okay, we basically agree that we want this feature. We're disagreeing on like the exact way it should work. And so we'd like to see this move forward.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think I want to put the ad hoc rule that like, if this is a highly visible language extension, which I think this is, it should not be merged without being reopened.
Or without going through a project group and MCP.
Yeah, which I think is going to imply closing it and reopening it, and some fresh discussion and fresh eyes. I think there are RFCs in here that there's one specific one that's been on my mind, which is Simone's example. We're running out of time here, but Simone had this one. I'm inclined to merge this RFC, right? It does generic APIs for manipulating the metadata of fat pointers. This feels like, yeah, it's visible, but I don't know what. I have to go reread it, but I remember the last time I read it, I thought it was fine. I don't know what. I don't think there's a whole lot of community input that people will be really surprised if these methods show up. It's going to be a problem. But in contrast, I do think a big feature like this, there just needs to be a certain amount of recency to it.
I'm curious about this one. I agree that it would be good to have support for this feature. Is this committing to more stability than we intend to provide in the short term?
Which are you referring to? This 2580?
2580.
I don't know what you mean by the question, I guess. More stability?
The idea of supporting these APIs makes a lot of sense. The idea of, I'm assuming that these APIs still need to wait quite some time and bake before they ever consider becoming stable.
Probably, but the goal of the RFC was to design a very minimal set of APIs that don't preclude any of the things people want to do in the future. So they should bake, and just because all APIs should bake, but they were designed for quicker stability and like designed not to be intentionally unambitious in terms of what capabilities they expose, if that makes sense.
I guess part of what I'm wondering is, do these prevent the compiler from being smarter in the future of saying, oh, well, it turns out that I know exactly what type this is, so I'm not going to bother storing it as a fat pointer?
I don't think anything does, because if that were possibly true, like, I never even thought about that as a thing you might want to do, but if you, I guess I feel like, I don't think the compiler can just can't do that. Or if it can only do that for like local variables, and in that case, it wouldn't be precluded, because it can sort of, if it knows the type, it can kind of reconstruct the metadata on the fly when you ask for it.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
If it's going to store it in the heap, it's going to, or not close. So we don't have to actually take the suggestion, because it's kind of, but it's an example of something. I'm going to put this line here because we didn't actually talk about it. Okay, this was an hour, and I think it was pretty productive. Should we do this again next week?
I would be in favor of doing this regularly, but I also think that we may, I would personally prefer to schedule it on a Monday or Wednesday rather than on a Friday.
Yeah, I didn't mean on Friday. I also would prefer not to do Friday. I think I kind of want to schedule a recurring meeting where we're just going to do this until we're done.
Yeah. As another alternative, I would also be happy to just have like a 4-hour session on a Monday and just work through 4 times as much of this.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that too, but not this Monday.
Sure. I would be quite happy to do that a week from Monday.
All right, why don't we discuss, let's not make this decision in this call, but we can discuss it on Zula. I'm trying to decide, maybe a week off is a good idea because of other things. Let me end this, let me end the recording for now.